instinct. But the trick, it seems to me, is to have some balance that causes the people who have the talents that can produce goods that people want in a market society to turn them out in great quantity and to keep wanting to do it all their lives. And at the same time, takes the people that lost the lottery and makes sure that just because they, on that one moment in time, they got the wrong ticket, don't live a life that's dramatically worse than the people that were luckier. And when I get all through with that long speech, I probably come out with the idea that the capital gains tax as it exists today is probably about right. So I see very few people, and I've been around a lot of people with money and talent over time. They don't always go together, but I've been around both classes. And I see very few of them that are turned off from using their talents by a 28%. Doesn't happen. I mean, they do what they like to do. And part of the reason they're good at what they do is they like to do it. And I've just never seen it happen. And I've seen a lot of people that pay taxes that are higher than 28% that are contributing more to society by some judgment other than a pure market system. The other question about the low-cost industrial, how does the industrial society evolve? The world evolves in a way in a market society, so people do what they're best at. And this country's done very well in recent years, something like software, where a Microsoft has been leading, or an Intel or something. I mean, we have done very well. 10 years ago, the American public was sort of down on itself, or 15 years ago, in terms of what the economy could do. But here we are with our unemployment rate in Nebraska. It's under 3%. And, you look at the countries of Europe that were supposedly going to beat us into the ground, or you look at Japan. And I think the American economy encourages adaptation. I mean, Singapore may be better, but in terms of major, large economies, I think the American economy does awfully well in encouraging adaptation to what people want, delivering it to them, and in ever-increasing amounts. And I view that as all to the good. So I don't regard any industry as sacred. I regard innovation and industry as sacred. I regard innovation and of production of goods in a market economy to spend 12 hours a day all the time. I don't see Andy or Bill letting up at all in terms of where Intel and Microsoft are now. I don't see Roberto Goizueta at Coca-Cola or Michael Eisner at Disney or any of those people. They don't work 40-hour weeks. They work 70 or 80-hour weeks. And I think that system works weeks. They work 70 or 80-hour weeks. And I think that system works.
I would not like the conclusion that both fairness are properly to be considered in the tax laws to cause anyone here to believe that I have a great respect for Harvard University's philosopher John Rawls. He is perhaps the world's best-known living philosopher. And personally, I think he's had a pernicious influence on human thought. He doesn't know enough science. He doesn't know enough economics. He doesn't know enough about how systems work to be really good at figuring out what's fair in systems. And he studied too much philosophy and too little of everything else. So if anybody thinks we love John Rawls, well, you can count me out.
Yeah. No, I wasn't endorsing his conclusions. I was endorsing his thought, his original construct. Charlie, how about the industries part of the question that Patrick asked?
Well, if Patrick isn't the smartest person in the room, there can't be many in his class. You are getting questions from a very able man, and he's deliberately made them very difficult. And that whole issue is too complex for me to usefully discuss here. There are also certain limitations on ability that enter the equation.
So we'll go to zone 10.
Good day, gentlemen. My name is Bill Rodenberg from Dayton, Ohio. I'm a shareholder, and my daughter, Sarah, who is 13, is also a shareholder. She chose not to join me in the limelight. I think the hot dogs had a higher appeal to her. And I would like to say that it's very reassuring to know that Uncle Warren and Uncle Charlie are taking care of her college fund, and it's easy to sleep at night. I have two questions, one related to a question my wife asked me, which I was unable to fake a good answer to, and the second one related to my daughter's one share of Berkshire A. My wife asked me, in the annual report, you stated that if anyone out there has a good company like Flight Safety, please let you know, and you'd be glad to look it over and give an answer within 5 minutes or less. And her question is, how can he do that? Where does he get the information to make that decision? And how does he know that that information is valid? My second question has to do with my daughter. She's 13. In 5 years, she'll be off to college, perhaps UNL, perhaps not. In any case, she's going to face a significant capital gains when she sells that one share of stock.
I hope so.
You mentioned earlier, and I believe this is correct, you said that you could trade one share of A for 30 shares of B this afternoon. And I thought, wait a minute, I thought there was a limited window on that. We happened to be out of the country at the time that exchange took effect, and we missed it.
No, the exchange exists forever.
Forever.
You can always exchange a share of A for 30 shares of B. You cannot do it in reverse. You cannot shift 30 shares of B into one share of A. But there was no window or timetable on that. The A stock is forever exchangeable for 30 shares of B. I don't recommend that she does it because it's always an option, and in the meantime she gets the shareholder designated contribution, and there's always a chance that the A will sell at a price slightly above 30 shares of B. It doesn't do it very often, and it won't be very much if it does, so there's no. We didn't want to create an incentive for people to exchange A for B, but they will always have the right to do so. The 5-minute test is, Charlie and we're familiar with virtually every company of a size that would interest us in the country. I mean, if you've been around for 40 or more years looking at businesses, it's just like if you were looking at, studying baseball players every day, you get to know all the players after a while. And that's the way it works. Then we have a bunch of filters we've developed in our minds over time. We don't say they're perfect filters. We don't say that those filters don't occasionally leave things out that should get through. But they're efficient, and they work just as well as if we spent months and hired experts and did all kinds of things. So we really can tell you in 5 minutes whether we're interested in something. We had never owned shares in Flight Safety, but we've been familiar with the company for at least 20 years, wouldn't you say, Charlie?
Sure, I had a partner who bought a lot of it.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's true of almost any business. And we've got a fix on what we don't understand, and then we don't care to know any more about them, particularly, although we'll pick up a little as we go along maybe. And then the ones that we're capable of understanding, we've probably gotten about as far as we'll get already. So we do know in 5 minutes. Now, when we do something with Flight Safety, before the purchase and even for somewhat a little after the purchase, I'd never set foot on a piece. They have 40 or so training centers around the world. I never set foot on one of them. I never been to their headquarters. We never looked at a lease. We never look at title to the properties. I mean, we don't do all of those things. And I will say this, to date, that's never cost us a penny. What costs us money is when we misassess the fundamental economic characteristics of the business. But that is something we would not learn by what people generally consider due diligence. We could have lawyers look over all kinds of things, but that isn't what makes a deal a good deal or a bad deal. And we don't kid ourselves by having lots of studies made and lots of reports made. And they're going to support whatever they think the guy that pays them, wants anyway. So it doesn't mean they don't mean anything. They're nonsense. But we do care about being right about the economic characteristics of the business, and that's one thing we think we've got certain filters that tell us in certain cases that we know enough to assess, and then we make some mistakes. Charlie?
I've got nothing to add to that except that people underrate the importance of a few simple, big ideas. And I think that to the extent Berkshire Hathaway is a didactic enterprise, teaching the right systems of thought, I think that the chief lessons are that a few big ideas really work. I think these filters of ours have worked pretty well. And because they're so simple.
Yeah, I think most of the people in this room, if they just focused on what made a good business or didn't make a good business and thought about it a little while, they could develop a set of filters that would let them in 5 minutes figure out pretty well what made sense or didn't make sense. I mean, there may be some reason after 5 minutes we don't get together on a deal of some sort. But another thing you can usually tell, at least you can tell it in the extreme cases, you can tell whether you've got the kind of manager very quickly that you want to have. I mean, if you've got somebody that's been batting .400 all their life and fortunately age doesn't change that picture in terms of business performance, and they love what they do, it's going to work. If the seller cares a lot about the money, you're probably not going to make a very good deal. I mean, if their real interest is is what they're going to do with the money, they may fall out of love or have less interest in their business subsequently. We love working with people who are just plain nuts about their businesses, and it works very well. And you can usually spot that. Now, having said that, we'll have a few people figuring out how to fake that attitude, when they try and sell us some piece of junk here. But Charlie says we can get conned by some guy with a green eye shade, and a low rent office and all that. But we won't get taken in by the guy with the suede shoes. Zone 11.
Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, thank you for having me here today. My name is Dorsey Brown from Baltimore, Maryland. I have two quick questions for you. Could you please comment on any observations that either of you may have concerning executive compensation and option issuance, a topic that seems to be getting a lot more media attention, and are we going to getting a little bit of excesses in that area? And my second question to you, Mr. Buffett, could you just give us some idea of what a normal day, how you would like to spend a reasonable normal day, and working on the investment side of the equation, or analysis, or reading, or just to give us some flavor of that? Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. Very easy. I read a lot, and I talk on the telephone a fair amount. We have no meetings. We have no committees. We have no slide presentations. We have nothing. I mean, so I read a lot. I read annual reports. I read business publications. I could do it in way less time, but I enjoy doing it, so I make it last. I mean, like some other activities in life. So there's really, it's the most boring job to anybody watching it, but I'm in love with it, and so I like doing that, and I don't like talking about it a lot. I just like to kind of keep up with what's going on. Like I say, by this point in life, I could filter out so much of that I just don't need to do that much of it. But I kind of enjoy just seeing what's going on vicariously through doing a lot of reading. And I spend some time on the phone, and I'm on the computer a lot playing bridge, and I get to do what I like all the time. We'll let Charlie describe what he does, which is even more bizarre. And then we'll talk about compensation and options.
Well, there's a little more foolishness in my life than Warren's, and including being chairman of a large hospital. I'm not suggesting that hospitals are foolish. I'm just suggesting that it takes a certain quirk of mind to be willing to be the chairman of a hospital. And so my life is even more, it's less rational than Warren's. Warren lives one of the most rational lives I've ever seen. And it's almost unbelievable. And
he's got me wondering why I'm here today. Well, we'll talk about comp then.
Yeah, comp, yeah.
The comps, there are 3 or 4 aspects to that. On the subject of options, I would say that most options are constructed poorly from the standpoint of the owner, but they're constructed very well from the standpoint of the person who receives them, which is not entirely unexplainable, because it's a very strange form of negotiation when the beneficiary is the one that also really does all the design and hires the experts to come in and tell them what is good for the company, when the expert knows that the guy who signs the check would be quite interested also in hearing what's good for him. There's nothing wrong with options per se at all. Frankly, in terms of Berkshire, it would have been perfectly appropriate if a properly designed option had been given to me or to Charlie. I mean, we have responsibility for the whole enterprise, and we believe that any kind of incentive for performance should be related to the area in which you have responsibility. We feel that if you want a typist to type 100 words a minute, that you ought to pay for typing 100 words a minute, not what the earnings per share were last year. We feel if a salesman gets paid for how many of the product is sold, he should get paid for that, and not for some production quotas met. So we believe in tying incentive comp to performance for which you have responsibility, and there's certain areas of a business that don't lend themselves to that staff performance and so on. But that would lead to the corollary that the people that are responsible for the entire results of the business, it's perfectly appropriate to compensate them by options that in some way reflect the performance of that entire business. Now, the trouble is that stock prices reflect other things than the performance of the business. For one thing, over a period of time, they reflect simply the reinvestment of earnings. I have pointed out in the past that if you gave me an option on your savings account to manage your savings account and you reinvested all the interest, I would take away a significant payment at the end of 10 years simply because you left the interest. And with a company that pays no dividend like Berkshire, if you're going to leave all your capital in every year, for me to get a fixed price option for 10 years would mean that I was getting a royalty on the money that you left with me, and I made the choice to have you leave it with me. So that does not strike me as equitable. So I think any option should have a step up in price that reflects the fact that money is reinvested by the shareholders annually. That if somebody wants to pay out 100% of the earnings every year, then I say that you can have a fixed priced option. If you give me the money every year and you do more with the money that's left with you in the original sum, that's fine. But if money is left with someone for 10 years, there's going to be some increase in value even if they spend every day golfing, and to give a piece of that away simply to have a royalty on the passage of time for them is a mistake. I think options ought to be granted basically at the fair value of the business at the time they're granted. Sometimes that's the market price, sometimes it isn't the market price, but certainly the management of a company would not give an option on their business to some third party at a market price they felt was way too low. So I find it a little disingenuous when management say that when they get a takeover bid, they say that the company's really worth twice that much, but they're perfectly willing to issue options to themselves at this price, which they say is totally inadequate when the owners get the option elsewhere. But options properly structured for people with responsibility for the business, I think, can make sense. And I think that if something happened to me and to Charlie, that in terms of the manager of the business subsequently, if it was structured properly, I would not see anything wrong with an option arrangement. We carry this philosophy down to our subsidiaries, where they generally have incentive arrangements that relate to the operation of their business, but they don't have incentive arrangements that relate to Berkshire overall, because if Chuck Huggins does a wonderful job at See's Candy, as he has done, and I fall on my face in terms of allocating capital, Berkshire stock will go no place despite what Chuck does. And to penalize him or to tie his rewards to something over which he has no control, I think is kind of silly. So we tie it instead to the operations of the candy business. In terms of overall level of compensation, the real sin is having a mediocre manager. I mean, that is what costs owners very significant amounts of money over time. And if a mediocre manager is paid a relatively small sum, it's still a great mistake. And if they're paid huge sums, it's a travesty, and that happens sometimes. It's almost impossible to pay the outstanding manager a sum that's disproportionate to the value of that outstanding manager when you get a large enterprise. Coca-Cola had a market value of $4 billion when Roberto Goizueta took over. It had stagnated during the previous decade under an earlier management, despite having the same product and those great Mean Joe Green commercials you saw. Mean Joe Green was in the 70s. The Teach the World to Sing commercial was in the 70s. All these great commercials, but the company didn't do much. Roberto, if we'd bought the entire Coca-Cola company, I wish we had, in 1981 or 2, whenever he came in for $4 billion, and we now had a business worth $150 billion, Roberto would have earned more money with us than he's earned under the present arrangement. I mean, having the right person in place is just enormously important. How much they should take is another question. That's more a philosophical question. Tom Murphy, best manager, in the world, he just didn't feel like taking a lot of money out of it, and I tip my hat to him, but I don't think that necessarily makes it wrong for somebody else to take more money for doing the job. But I think it ought to be related to doing the job. When I ran a partnership in the 1960s, I took a quarter of the profit, over 6% a year, and I didn't get paid any salary, but I could make a lot of money doing that. And that thought occurred to me as I ran the place from day to day, and I think it probably helped a little. So I don't think it's a terrible thing to have somebody get paid for making money for the shareholders, but they ought to get paid for really making it, not simply because the shareholders reinvest money with them. They ought to make it based on the fair value of what they had when they took over, and they ought to make it really for just excellent performance. Charlie?
Well, we have remarked in previous Berkshire Hathaway meetings that we regard present mandated corporate accounting with respect to stock options as weak, corrupt, and contemptible. And it is.
Otherwise, we're undecided.
If something is so wonderful as a standard technique of compensation, why does it have to be masked under weak, corrupt, and contemptible accounting? I think it is no credit to our civilization that we've drifted into this particular modality. And you can get, if you overuse stock options, where the whole thing is sort of a chain letter. I mean, in Silicon Valley, there's one company that practically paid everybody in options. And as long as the chain letter galloped, it worked as far as the income account because nothing went through expense. And then once everybody is issuing stock options, everybody else feels that he has to do it, and the practice spreads. So I am not totally wild about the extreme prevalence of the stock option modality in American corporate life. Personally, I would vastly prefer different modalities, which would probably involve stock instead of stock options. I'm all for sharing with the kind of people who are doing the important work pretty well down in the organization at a place like Costco or Coca-Cola or any other such company, but I don't much like the present scheme that civilization has drifted into. With respect to the subject of do we have some wretched excesses in American corporate compensation, my answer would be yes. I don't think the excess is necessarily the guy who got the most money. In many cases, I agree with Warren that the money has been deserved. But such is the envy effect that the practice spreads to everybody else, and then the taxi driver and everybody starts thinking the system is irrational, unfair, crazy, and I think that's what causes some people, as they rise in American corporations, to, at a certain point of power gaining and wealth gaining, they start exercising extreme restraint as a sort of moral duty. And that's what Warren was saying about Tom Murphy. And I would argue that the Tom Murphy attitude is the right attitude. And it goes way, way back in the history of civilization. The word liturgy comes from a Greek word which is just the same. I mean, if you were an important citizen of Athens, it was a lot like being an important person in Jewish culture. I mean, you had duties to give back and to act as a certain example. And the civilization had social pressures that enforced those duties. And I would argue that the Berkshire Hathaway compensation system, considering what the people at the top already have, it would be better if we saw a little more of it. I think Warren and I do all right.
Few years ago, I think an added problem is the sort of, in terms of the accounting, particularly the sort of hypocrisy that it pushes people into, and then which becomes accepted and sort of a norm, particularly when leaders do it. And, you had a situation a few years back when there's no question that any manager would say that stock options are a form of compensation. They would say that compensation is a form of expense, and they would say that expense belongs in the income account. But they didn't want to have stock options counted because they felt that it might restrict their use. So when the FASB, Financial Accounting Standards Board, came up with a proposal to actually have reality reflected en masse, corporate chieftains descended on Washington to pressure legislators to have Congress start enacting accounting standards, which, as I mentioned one time, in Indiana in the 1890s, there was a legislator that introduced a bill to have the value of pi changed to an even 3 because he thought 3.14159 was too tough for the school children and it would ease computational problems. Well, that sort of behavior by corporate chieftains, when they are in there, arguing that black is white in order to feather their own nests and maybe create little higher stock prices, I think that it means that they forfeit to some degree their right to be taken seriously when they claim they're operating for the good of the republic and march on Washington in other regards. And I just think that when the organization recognizes its hypocrisy and so on, I think there's a degradation that can set in through an organization that whose leaders are also leaders in hypocrisy. Like I say, we have no strong feelings on this subject, but Charlie, do you have anyone?
It's rather interesting, though. There's a as an earlier example, Commodore Vanderbilt took no salary from his railroads. After all, he controlled the railroads. They paid all the dividends that he needed, and he got the fun of running the whole railroad, and he thought it was beneath Commodore Vanderbilt to take a salary. We've never quite reached the Vanderbilt standard, but
we don't have any dividends, Charlie.
Well, maybe that's the reason.
Yeah. Well, with that, we'll take a break. We've got food out in the other room, including See's candy. For those who haven't tried it, we've almost finished this box up here, and we'll reconvene at 12:30. Thanks. Okay, if we're live now, what we might do is maybe have I think maybe we only need 4 microphones for the afternoon session. So we'll have 2 on each side, one toward the back, one toward the front, and we'll just go around in 4 microphones. Are we okay on that? And we'll start just 1 second. Everybody has a chance to get to their seats. Charlie has promised to stop tapping the Coke can during this session.
I only did that when somebody else was talking.
Number 2? Okay, Charlie. I used to have a friend that was a stock salesman many years ago, and when you'd have lunch with him, he would just keep going like this. And finally, it would get to you and you say, "What's that?" And he'd say, "That's opportunity." He was pretty good. Okay, let's. Kelly tells me we should start with number 2, zone 2. So we're going to start with zone 2.
Yes, I'm Fred Cooker from Boulder, Colorado. And this is a question about intrinsic value, and it's a question for both of you because you have written that perhaps you would come up with different answers. You write and speak a great deal about intrinsic value, and you indicate that you try to give shareholders the tools in the annual report so they can come to their own determination. What I'd like you to do is expand upon that a little bit. First of all, what do you believe to be the important tools, either in the Berkshire annual report or other annual reports that you review in determining intrinsic value? Secondly, what rules or principles or standards do you use in applying those tools? And lastly, how does that process, that is, the use of the tools, the application of the standards, relate to what you have previously described as the filters you use in determining your valuation of a company?
If we could see in it, looking at any business, what its future cash inflows or outflows from the business to the owners or from the owners would be over the next, we'll call it 100 years, or until the business is extinct, and then could discount that back at the appropriate interest rate, which I'll get to in a second, that would give us a number for intrinsic value. In other words, it would be like looking at a bond that had a whole bunch of coupons on it that was due in 100 years, and if you could see what those coupons are, you can figure the value of that bond compared to government bonds if you want to stick an appropriate risk rate in. Or you can compare one government bond with 5% coupons to another government bond with 7% coupons. Each one of those bonds has a different value because they have different coupons printed on them. Businesses have coupons that are going to develop in the future too. The only problem is they aren't printed on the instrument, and it's up to the investor to try to estimate what those coupons are going to be over time. As we have said, in high-tech businesses or something like that, we don't have the faintest idea what the coupons are going to be. When we get into businesses where we think we can understand them reasonably well, we are trying to print the coupons out. We are trying to figure out what businesses are going to be worth in 10 or 20 years. When we bought See's Candy in 1972, we had to come to the judgment as to whether we could figure out the competitive forces that would operate, the strengths and weaknesses of the company, and how that would look over a 10 or 20 or 30-year period. And if you attempt to assess intrinsic value, it all relates to cash flows. The only reason for putting cash into any kind of an investment now is because you expect to take cash out. Not by selling it to somebody else, because that's just a game of who beats who, but by, in a sense, by what the asset itself produces. That's true if you're buying a farm, it's true if you're buying an apartment house, it's true if you're buying a business. And the filters you described, there are a number of filters which say to us, we don't know what that business is going to be worth in 10 or 20 years, and we can't even make an educated guess. Obviously, we don't think we know to 3 decimal places or 2 decimal places or anything like that, precisely what's going to be produced. But we have a high degree of confidence that we're in the ballpark with certain kinds of businesses. The filters are designed to make sure we're in those kinds of businesses. We basically use long-term, risk-free, that's government bond type interest rates to think back in terms of what we should discount at. And you know, that's what the game of investment is all about. Investment is putting out money to get more money back later on from the asset, and not by selling it to somebody else, but by what the asset itself will produce. If you're an investor, you're looking at what the asset is going to do, in our case, businesses. If you're a speculator, you're primarily focusing on what the price of the object is going to do, independent of the business, and that's not our game. So we figure if we're right about the business, we're going to make a lot of money, and if we're wrong about the business, we don't have any hopes. We don't expect to make money. And in looking at Berkshire, we try to tell you as much as possible as we can about our business, of the key factors. Those are the things that Charlie and I, the things we put in our report about those businesses are the things that we look at ourselves. So if Charlie had nothing to do with Berkshire, but he looked at our report, he would probably, in my view, he would come to pretty much the same idea of intrinsic value that he would come to from being around it, for X number of years. The information should be there. We give you the information that if the positions were reversed, we would want to get from you. And in companies like Coca-Cola or Gillette or Disney or those kind of businesses, you will see the information in the reports. You have to have some understanding of what they're doing, but you have that in your everyday activities. You'll get that kind of knowledge. You won't get it, in terms of some high-tech company, but you'll get it with those kind of companies. And then you sit down and you try to print out the future. Charlie?
I would argue that one filter that's useful in investing is the simple idea of opportunity cost. If you have one opportunity that you already have available in large quantity and you like it better than 98% of the other things you see, well, you can just screen out the other 98% because you already know something better. So that people who have a lot of opportunities tend to make better investments than people that don't have a lot of opportunities, and people who have very good opportunities, and using a concept of opportunity cost, they can make better decisions about what to buy. With this attitude, you get a concentrated portfolio, which we don't mind. That practice of ours, which is so simple, is not widely copied. I do not know why. Now, it's copied among the Berkshire shareholders. I mean, all you people have learned it. But it's not the standard in investment management, even at great universities and other intellectual institutions. Very interesting question. If we're right, why are so many eminent places so wrong?
There are several possible answers to that question.
Yes.
The attitude, though, I mean, if somebody shows us a business, the first thing goes through our head is, would we rather own this business than more Coca-Cola? Would we rather own it than more Gillette? It's crazy not to compare it to things that you're very certain of. There's very few businesses that we'll find that we're certain of the future about as companies such as that. And therefore, we will want companies where the certainty gets close to that, and then we'll want to figure that we're better off than just buying more of those. If every management, before they bought a business in some unrelated field that they might not have even heard of, more than a short time before that's being promoted to them, if they said, is this better than buying in our own stock? Is this better than even buying Coca-Cola stock or something? There'd be a lot fewer deals done, but they tend not to measure. We try to measure against what we regard as close to perfection as we can get. Charlie, anyone?
Well, I will say this, that the concept of intrinsic value used to be a lot easier because there were all kinds of stocks that were selling for 50% or less of the amount at which you could have easily liquidated the whole corporation if you owned the whole corporation. Indeed, in the history of Berkshire Hathaway, we bought things at 20% of then liquidating value. And in the old days, the Ben Graham followers could run their Geiger counters over corporate America, and they could spill out a few things, and you could easily see, if you were at all familiar with the market prices of whole corporations, that you were buying at a huge discount. Well, no matter how bad the management, if you're buying at 50% of asset value or 30% or so on down, you have a lot going for you. And as the world has wised up and as stocks have behaved so well for people that stocks generally have gone to higher and higher prices, that game gets much harder. Now to find something at a discount from intrinsic value those simple systems ordinarily don't work. You've got to get into Warren's kind of thinking, and that is a lot harder. I think you can predict the future in a few places best if you understand a few basic ideas that come from a good general education. And that's what I was talking about in that talk I gave at the USC Business School. In other words, Coca-Cola is a simple company if it's stripped down and analyzed in terms of some elemental forces. It's not hard to understand Costco either. You know, I mean, there are certain fundamental models out there that do not take, you don't have the kind of ability that quantum mechanics requires. You just have to know a few simple things and really know them.
When Charlie talks about liquidating value, he's not talking about closing up the enterprise, but he's talking about what somebody else would pay for that stream of cash, too. I mean, if you could have looked at a collection of television stations owned by a Cap Cities, for example, in the early to 1974, and it would have been worth, we'll say, 4 times what the company was selling for. Not because you'd closed the stations, but just their stream of income was worth that to somebody else. It's just that the marketplace was very depressed, although, like I say, on a negotiated basis, you could have gone and sold the properties for 4 times what the company was selling for, and you got wonderful management. And I mean, those things happen in markets. They will happen again. But part of investing and calculating intrinsic values is if you get the wrong answer when you get through. In other words, if it says don't buy, you can't buy just because somebody else thinks it's going to go up or because your friends have made a lot of easy money lately or anything of the sort. You have to be able to walk away from anything that doesn't work, and very few things work these days. You also have to walk away from anything you don't understand, which in my case is a big handicap.
But you would agree with Warren that it's much harder now.
Yeah, but I would also agree that almost at any time over the last 40 years that we've been up on a podium, we would have said it was much harder in the past, too. But it is harder now. It's way harder. But part of it being harder now, too, is the amount of capital we run. I mean, if we were running $100,000, our prospects for returns would be, and we really needed the money, our prospects for return would be considerably better than they are running Berkshire. It's very simple. Our universe of possible ideas would expand by a huge factor. We are looking at things today that, by their nature, a lot of people are looking at, and there were times in the past when we were looking at things that very few people were looking at. But there were other times in the past when we were looking at things where the whole world was just looking at them kind of crazy, and that's a decided help. Zone 3.
My name is Bakul Patel. I am from upstate New York. I have got a few questions, and I need your permission to ask each question separately and wait for the answer.
Well, we'll take a couple, but
Yeah.
I got through college, only answering 3 or 4 questions, so I don't want to go through that again.
They are unrelated questions.
Okay. We'll give you a couple, and then we'll let other people have a chance. How about 2, okay?
Fine. Mr. Market is valuing Dow Jones at above 7,000 and S&P at above 800. By your valuation model, at the current interest rate and current inflation rate and current growth rate, what is the fair valuation of both these companies?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, but a tough question. But I would say that if you believed the American business in aggregate could earn the kind of returns on equity that they have been earning in the last couple of years, and then you postulate no change in interest rates, you can justify 7,000 on the Dow and 800 on the S&P. Now, there's a couple ifs I threw in there, and if interest rates go higher, the valuation goes down automatically. And more importantly, if the returns on equity of American industry, which are at historic highs, and which sort of classical economics would tell you would be hard to maintain, if those returns go down on average, that also would pull it down. But if you're willing to accept the current level of returns on equity as being typical of the future case for American business, and you're willing to assume present interest rates are lower, then you can justify a valuation on the Dow and S&P. And it's interesting. Because I got all that commentary after I wrote that line in the report, which was, as I said earlier, designed for a little something else. I'll give you a little trivia quiz. What 2 years in this century has the Dow had the greatest overall gain? The 2 years in the 1900s are 1933, which most of you don't think of as a banner year, but and 1954. And in both of those years, the Dow was up over 50%, counting dividends. In March of 1955, because of that, the fact that the Dow had gone up, bear in mind that the high on the Dow was 381 in 1929, and it took 25 years before that was surpassed. And in 1954, the Dow went from, say, 280 up to 404, or something like that, just a little over 50%. So what did they decide to do? They decided to have congressional hearings about it. And they did. In March of 1955, they had hearings in the Senate Banking and Currency Committee, Chairman Fulbright, and my boss, Ben Graham, was called down to testify. And it's fascinating reading. Bernard Baruch was there, all kinds of people. I've got the hearings at home. And Ben's opening comments about the market at that time, where the market looks high, it is high, but it's not as high as it looks. Well, that's about the present situation. I mean, it looks very high just by comparing 7,000, certainly to the 404 at the end of 1954 when Ben was testifying. But there have been huge changes in earnings and return on equity on American business in general, and then you've had this big move in interest rates. Now, those are underlying fundamentals that have powered a huge bull market. After a while, as I mentioned earlier, people get captivated simply by the notion of rising prices without going back to the underlying rationale, and that's when you get very dangerous conditions in terms of possible bubbles. And it would, I have no idea where markets will go, but you have the kind of conditions that could cause real excesses, just like you had excesses in 1973 and 4, going back to when you could buy things at 20 cents on the dollar. You had excesses in the other direction. The country didn't disappear or anything. It's just people behave in extreme ways in markets. And over time, that's very good for people that keep their heads. Charlie?
I've got nothing to add.
Okay, get one more.
If Mr. Market goes in a depressed phase, that Berkshire Hathaway has got an investment portion of its book value about $28,000 per Class A share. That would put the Berkshire Hathaway share much lower than what it is now. Would Berkshire Hathaway consider buying back its own share, or has it done it so in past, or is it out of the question?
If the market went in the tank, Berkshire stock would go in the tank too. And so there shouldn't be anybody in this room that owns a stock that would not find it palatable, if not become positively enthusiastic about the stock going down 50%. It would not bother Charlie, it wouldn't bother me, because we would have very intelligent things then to do with whatever capital we came into, and we would be generating capital as we went along. We wouldn't have sold our Coke, we wouldn't have sold our Gillette, we wouldn't have sold our businesses. So most of our capital would have ridden that down, but at least we would have intelligent things to do with the money. One of the intelligent things possibly could be to buy in our own stock, but that would imply that our own stock was cheaper relative to value than anything else we could find among possible opportunities, and the chances are we could find things that were more attractive. Back in 1973 or 4, when we were buying Washington Post at a fraction of what it was worth, Berkshire stock may have been cheap then, but it wasn't as cheap as the Washington Post. In 1987 it would have been 1988 and 89, Berkshire stock may or may not have been cheap, but it wasn't as cheap as Coca-Cola. And it's unlikely that among the thousands of possible investments that Berkshire will be the most attractive at any time. But if it were, obviously we would buy in our own stock. But I think if the Dow went down 50%, we would have plenty of interesting things to do, and we would not be unhappy. Charlie?
Yeah, we don't have any rule against it. If opportunity cost is the game around here.
Zone 4.
I'm David Day from Coppell, Texas, and I'm a Berkshire shareholder. Mr. Buffett, what is your opinion of investing in foreign company stocks?
Well, we have a number, well, at least several major businesses, 3 or 4, at least 5, 6, as I count along, that derive very significant percentages of their earnings from the international operations. Coca-Cola earns 80% or more from international operations. Gillette would earn 2/3 or more from international operations. So if you look to where our look-through earnings are coming from, we get a lot from international companies. They don't have to be domiciled outside the United States. It's a slight advantage to us to have them domiciled in this country. For example, their dividends are treated better. We get better treatment on the dividends if they are domestically based rather than based someplace else, just because of the way the U.S. tax laws work. But if Coca-Cola were domiciled in Amsterdam or Gillette were domiciled in London, they had the same basic businesses, we would be attracted to them to virtually the same degree we are as having them domiciled in Atlanta and Boston. We look at businesses outside this country that are domiciled outside this country. Many don't meet our size requirements, but that's true here too. But we have to look at very big companies. But we have nothing against buying into companies that are domiciled, or even buying the entire business of a company that's domiciled outside the United States. We feel slightly less familiar with the tax laws and the corporate cultures, perhaps, but that would not be a huge factor in a great many countries. And we will keep looking. We need to look everywhere with the kind of money that we have available for investment. Charlie?
Again, we've had a wonderful way of playing the rapid development of economies outside the United States, and so far we haven't seen anything that attracted us as being better. And if you can sell Coca-Cola, do you really want to get into steel in Malaysia or something?
We sold a substantial number of Kirby units outside of the United States last year, and that business has grown very significantly in recent years, and I think it promises to grow more. We're always looking for opportunities. Some things travel very well, and some things don't. I mean, Gillette travels, Disney travels, McDonald's travels, Coke travels. See's Candy doesn't travel as well. It might if you spent 50 years working on it, but it's not an easy thing to travel. Actually, candy bars themselves don't travel very well. If you look at the top-selling candy bars in France or in England and Japan, you don't find the similarity that you find in terms of the best-selling soft drinks or movies or fast food hamburgers or razor blades. And
except Snickers. For some reason, Snickers.
Well,
travels very well. Don't ask me why.
Yeah. Well, Charlie's had a lot of experience as he goes around the world. You don't want to eat where we eat. You may want to invest where we invest, but okay. Section 1.
I'm Richard Tompkins from Gallatin, Tennessee, and I have just 2 quick questions. Could both of y'all discuss the Kansas Bankers business and its competitors, how big of a moat Kansas Bankers has in the industry, and if they're going to expand, outside of the 22 or 20 states that they're currently in? That's A. And then secondly, just clue us in a little bit more on the 5-year discount notes that you did that were tied to the Solomon stock, and was that a way to unload it, or just kind of give us a little more than what we saw in the annual?
Sometimes in the insurance business, you have a choice between being a good business or a big business. And fortunately, Don Toll, who runs Kansas Bankers Surety, is chosen for a good business. It's a specialized operation that sells, as its name implies, to bankers, and primarily policies that have fidelity coverage. And that is just not a big volume business in the whole United States. They do it exceptionally well. Don knows he knows every account, he knows every claim. He runs a fabulous operation, but it's not an operation that can double or triple in size, doing what it does and doing well. There's not the opportunity there. On the other hand, I think it's tough to compete against Don, because he brings an element of knowledge and personal attention to the account and factors of that sort that a really large company would have trouble duplicating. Charlie, you want to add anything on Kansas Bankers?
Yeah, there's a huge class of businesses in America which are very strong and will throw out large amounts of cash in relation to their size, but which can't rationally be expanded very much. And if you try and expand certain kinds of businesses, you're throwing money down the rat hole. The beauty of the Berkshire Hathaway system is that such businesses are very welcome here, because the cash comes into headquarters and is allocated there. If there's anything sensible to do at the subsidiary level, why, we always want it done, but there are businesses where, lots of businesses where there isn't much of a way of redeploying the cash.
Part of the reason they have a moat around them is that they're of a size and have specialized skills that other organizations just can't get into it. I'll give you another example, and that's somewhat same field. There's a company called Western Surety. It's changed ownership a couple of times. Charlie and I went up to see him 15 years ago by buying it at Sioux Falls. They write notary bonds, and they write a whole bunch of things that have $50 premiums or $25 premiums. There was a company doing not that many millions of premiums, but they had 30,000 agents. But each agent, may have done $500 worth of business with them a year, or $1,000. Well, Chubb can't go after that business the same way. We certainly can at National Indemnity. They have a distribution system that works wonders, but you can't pump 2 or 3 times the volume through that distribution system. And if you could pump it through, there would have been more competition. So there are businesses that have certain natural limits that you want to be careful that you don't talk yourself into thinking a business that has limits and find out that it really has way more potential. I mean, it would have been a shame if Mr. Candler decided that Coca-Cola only appealed to people in Atlanta or something of the sort. So you got to be a little careful on that. But a fellow like Don will be very good at understanding, where his competitive advantages can take him and where they don't take him. He's done a terrific job over the years doing it. There was a second question, was there? No.
Just the $500 million, I think, that y'all did of the discount.
The Solomon notes. Yeah. Well, that is simply an issue of Berkshire, by Berkshire, of $500 million, as you mentioned, of a very low coupon note, low interest rate note too, that is convertible or exchangeable into Solomon stock anytime during the next 5 years. And it's a way of taking the capital out of that block of stock at a low interest cost to use elsewhere while retaining a limited portion of the upside in the Solomon stock. And we made that decision whenever it was, 6 months ago or so, based on the thought that we might have some good opportunities at some point to use that money, and raising the money at a little over a 1% current cost or a 3% cost to maturity, and we think the actual cost is likely to be close to the 1%, made sense for us. We have never owned, we had the convertible prefers of Champion, of U.S. Airways, and of Solomon. And those are three industries. I don't think we've ever owned an airline stock, common stock. I don't think we've ever owned a paper company common stock, and we've only had a very limited amount of investment in the investment banking businesses. Those are industries that we don't feel that we've got the same kind of long-term economic advantage that we have in something like a Coke or a Gillette. So those are not natural places for us to be common shareholders. And the issuance of that exchangeable debt reflected that view. Charlie?
I agree.
Okay, zone 2.
My name is Kristen Schramm. I am from Springfield, Illinois. I am a proud shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway. In light of the upcoming capital gains tax reduction, do you envision any increased selling pressure, such as buying opportunities for Berkshire stock?
Oh, that's a good question, Christine. We're proud to have you, too. A very high percentage of Berkshire shares is owned by people with a very low tax basis, so that if I had to guess, I would say that probably 80% at least of the shares are owned by people whose cost is less than $100 a share on the A stock. And that undoubtedly contributes to some people's reluctance to sell, particularly if they're older. But I think it might make less difference than you think. I think most people, if there were a lower capital gains rate, I don't think it'd be a huge change in the propensity to sell the stock. I would hope, even if there was a zero capital gains tax, that there really wouldn't be any rush for the exits. It wouldn't affect my attitude particularly, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that as the tax rate goes down, there will be some greater tendency to sell by people with a low tax basis on their shares. Charlie?
Well, I think the laws of microeconomics and the laws of psychology are such that if you said the tax rate will, for 1 month, go down to zero, you would have some very dramatic effects in the markets. It's not going to happen, of course.
No, but if you said the tax rate was going to zero for 1 month and then going to 100% subsequently, I think you'd get a certain amount of activity.
Well, then you'd really... So you could tinker with the tax laws in a way that would cause dramatic market effects. I don't anticipate any such things happening. We had something similar back when they, what was it, 86? Where and the tax rate was 20% on long-term capital gains, and it was the last year you could liquidate a corporation and not pay gains taxes on appreciated assets that were disposed of in the liquidation, and we got a great flood of liquidations in that year. So it's possible to do things to the tax laws that have big market effects. I think it's very unlikely that any such thing is going to happen this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. Zone 2?
What number is this?
Is there a zone 2?
Is this it?
The microphone working? Oh, zone 3? Well, we'll go to zone 3 then.
That's what they
I am Charles Parcells from Grosse Pointe, Michigan. Very glad to be here. I'm a recent stockholder of Berkshire. I'm sorry to say that, but it does not diminish my admiration for past performance or my confidence in future performance. I heard recently a remark by, I think, a very successful investor, whom I think worked with the Bass family in Texas for a while. And one of his comments, if I understand it correctly, said something like this. Hurricane Andrew destroyed the super cat industry. And that's about all he said, and I know we're into it. I'm interested in its importance to Berkshire and your comments on it, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger.
Yeah, I guess I would say I don't fully understand why he would, or even partially understand, why he would say that. I mean, we are in business, in the super cat business, and I should explain, super cat business is very much like it sounds. I mean, we write insurance for other insurance companies, other reinsurance companies, to protect them, to pay them at a time when something really big comes along, a super catastrophe. And Hurricane Andrew was certainly a super catastrophe. But that's the reason people do business with us. So we pay off infrequently, but we pay off big. And we paid off about $120 million at Hurricane Andrew. But if Hurricane Andrew happened today, well, at least when one of the policies in SEPs we have, we would certainly be paying off at least, $600-700 million, something like that. And if it happens 5 years from now, we'll pay off a lot more than that because we will undoubtedly be writing more business at that time. So it's just part of the game. And there will be super cats of various kinds. There will be, huge quakes. There will be more hurricanes than huge quakes. And when that time comes, we will write a big check. But that doesn't, prices may be firmer after such an event. They may not be. They didn't firm as much as you might expect after Andrew happened. Andrew was a huge surprise to people. As a digression, people in the insurance business thought that they all had these models, and some of them were prepared by reinsurance brokers and some of them by various research institutes, as how much they would lose under certain kinds of circumstances. And they couldn't have been further off with an Andrew or with the Northridge earthquake. Fortunately, we don't rely on those. I don't know what exactly we do rely on, but we don't rely on those. And the Hurricane Andrew was, that's part of business with Berkshire, and we will have another one, and we'll have another one after that. So every 3 or 5 or 7 years, or who knows what, we will lose significant money in the super cat business, and we expect that over 20 or 25 years we will make more money than we lose. We bring some real advantages to that business, as I wrote about in the report, and it makes sense for us to be in it. It only makes sense for us to be in it when the premium prices are right, but when they are appropriate, we're more than willing to step up and take on a fair amount of risk. As I wrote in the report on the California Earthquake Authority, we could tomorrow face a demand for roughly $1 billion, and we are prepared to write a check that day to take care of that, and we will write it if it happens. And there aren't very many people in the world that an insured can count on to do that. The interesting thing is that the worst exposures still for super cats are not borne by us, but they're borne implicitly by some very big direct writing companies that have lots of risk on Long Island or along the New Madrid Fault or other places. And they have got, millions of policies and maybe hundreds of thousands of exposed policies, and they don't think of themselves as being in the super cat business, or they really do, but they don't think day by day about it, and they are very exposed. Our exposures are limited to a given dollar amount. That dollar amount may be large, but at least we know what it is, and we take risks that we're willing to take risks when we think we're appropriately paid. There's a mentality to bring to the super cat business that's somewhat akin to what you bring to the investment business, so we think we're well equipped for it. Charlie?
Yeah, the $1 billion would be what, 2.5% or less of the liquid assets and securities around Berkshire, and So that's irritating, but it's not going to destroy the enterprise. Whereas if you have an unwitting super cat exposure that you don't even recognize you have, it could destroy your company. 20th Century, a very well-run direct writer of insurance, they all but went broke with the Northridge earthquake.
And they didn't think it was possible either.
And they had no idea they had a super cat exposure in what they thought was a simple little direct writing insurance operation. No, I don't think we've got the main super cat risks at all at Berkshire.
Geico lost something like $150 million in Andrew, and their initial estimate of the loss was like $35 million, and that's after they thought they'd heard about most of it. You can really get fooled in this business. In fact, 20th Century, which lost $1 billion at Northridge, just at the end of 1996, I think, added $40 million, as I remember, to the reserves for the Northridge quake, which I think was in January of '94. Now, you'd think on an earthquake you'd kind of know when it was over, but you can get fooled. And down at Andrew, I mean, the costs of construction go up dramatically in an area that's been wiped out, and then there were all kinds of things in the codes. I mean, I think they started requiring architect's drawings on everything, over $5,000 in the way of repair, or some number like that. Don't hold me to the number. And of course, the architects had a field day, and then it turned out that everybody had a homeowner's policy. In the Oakland fire, for example, they all had a $300,000 book collection in their library, and who knows after the place is burned down. It's not. You get a lot of surprises in that field. And the surprises in insurance are never symmetrical. They're all bad. Zone 4.
Yes, my name is Jinting Wang. I'm from New Mexico, and I'm a shareholder. I have two questions. First, that in your 91 letter, you wrote that investors eventually repeat their mistakes. So what do you do to keep you from making the same mistake twice? And the second question is, in your 92 letter, you wrote that you attempt to deal with the problem of future earning in two ways. First is the business you understand, and the second is the margin of safety. And you said they are equally important. But if you cannot find the happy combination of faster growth at a low PE, which one do you think is more important, faster growth or low PE? That's my two questions.
I think we were told by some higher authority which one was more important there for a second. Well, they're bound together. Obviously, if you understood a business perfectly, the future of a business, you would need very little in the way of a margin of safety. So the more volatile the business is, or possibility is, but assuming you still want to invest in it, the larger the margin of safety. I think in that first edition of Graham and Dodd, if I remember, it was a J.I. Casey used and said, maybe it was worth somewhere between 30 and 110 or some number. He said, well, that sounds pretty. How much good does that do you to know that it's worth between 30 and 110? Well, it does you some good if it's selling below 30 or above 110. And you need a large margin of safety. Well, if you're driving a truck across a bridge that says it holds 10,000 pounds and you've got a 9,800-pound vehicle, if the bridge is about 6 inches above the crevice that it covers, you may feel okay. But if it's over the Grand Canyon, you may feel you want a little larger margin of safety in terms of only driving a 4,000-pound truck or something across. So it depends on the nature of the underlying risk. We don't get the margin of safety now that we got in a 1973-4 period, for example. The biggest thing to do is understand the business. If you understand the business and get into the kind of businesses where surprises, by the nature, surprises are few, and we think we're largely in that type of business. The earlier part about, I've said about learning from your mistakes. The best thing to do is learn from other guys' mistakes. I mean, it's like, Patton used to say, it's an honor to die for your country. Make sure the other guy gets the honor, So our approach is really to try and learn vicariously, but there's a lot of mistakes that I've repeated. I can tell you that. The biggest one, probably the biggest category over time, is being reluctant to pay up a little for a business I knew was really outstanding, or to continue to buy it at higher prices when I knew it was outstanding. So the costs of that have been in many, many billions, and I'll probably keep making that mistake. The mistakes are made when there are businesses you can understand and they're attractive and you don't do something about it. I don't worry at all about the mistakes that come about because when I met Bill Gates, I didn't buy Microsoft or something. That's not my game. But the mistakes are made most of our mistakes have been mistakes of omission rather than commission. Charlie?
Yeah, I think most people get very few what I call no-brainer opportunities, where it's just so damned obvious that this is going to work. And since they are very few and they may be separated by periods of years, I think people have to learn to have the courage and the intelligence to step up in a major way when those rare opportunities come by.
Yeah, you gotta be willing to take a really big bite, and it's crazy if you don't, and it's crazy if you dabble around at the edges so you're not prepared to take a big bite when the time comes. We apparently have lost mic 4, so we're just gonna use 3 mics from now on, and if you'll just make your way to those mics, we'll see how we do with them. How about zone 1?
Mr. Buffett, my name is Pete Brown from Columbus, Ohio, Class B shareholder. I had a couple questions if I could. The first is I don't have a very good idea in my mind how our typical insurance operations work. I mean, in particular, how money leaves the insurance pool and enters the investment pool, and how our operations are different than the typical run-of-the-mill insurance operation, around the country. Why are we able to generate so much more float than the XYZ company, somewhere else? And the second question is, it kind of goes back to an article you wrote for Fortune magazine back in the late 70s about the effect of inflation on equity values and that sort of thing. And in it you asserted that stocks and businesses were really like bonds. They just had their own par, and the par being the average 12% return on equity that companies have averaged. A company that does better than that has assets that are worth way more than 100 cents on the dollar. A company does less, will be less correspondingly. My question is, when you're projecting cash flows of a company as a prospective investment, why would you use the interest rate, of risk-free treasury bills? Why wouldn't you use the sort of opportunity cost to discount it that maybe Charlie was referring to, maybe 12% return on equity of average corporations, maybe your 15% goal, maybe Coca-Cola's return on equity is a comparison. I mean, doing that would dramatically change the value of the company that you're evaluating, as I'm sure you know. Why would you use the risk-free rate is my question.
The risk-free rate is used merely to equate one item to another. In other words, we're looking for whatever is the most attractive. But in terms of present valuing anything, we're going to use a number, and obviously we can always buy the government bond, so that becomes the yardstick rate. It doesn't mean we want to buy government bonds. It doesn't mean we want to buy government bonds if the best thing we can find has a present value that's works out at 0.5% a year better than the government bond. But it's the appropriate yardstick in our view to simply use to compare across all kinds of investment opportunities, oil wells, farms, whatever it may be. Now it gets into a degree of certainty too, but it's the yardstick rate. It's not because we want to buy government bonds, but it does serve to make that a constant throughout the valuation process.
Yeah.
in our insurance business, we really have a group of insurance businesses, and they have different characteristics. The consistent characteristic actually is that they're all very, very good businesses. Some of them are a lot larger and have opportunities to get larger, and some of them are not so large and have limited opportunities in terms of growth. But every insurance operation we have is a distinct asset to Berkshire. We've got smaller workers' comp operation. We've got a credit operation, credit card operation. We've got a home state operation. We have all these different businesses, Kansas Bankers, Sureties, whatever. They're all good businesses. Some of them don't develop a lot of float relative to premium volume. The nature of Kansas Bankers, Sureties is that it won't develop a lot of float. It just happens to be the kind of business they write. The nature of comp is that it develops more float because comp claims pay more slowly. You really should think of each one of those having different characteristics. GEICO is entirely different than the super cat business. They're both good businesses. In terms of how we invest the money when it comes in, we invest it when it comes in. I mean, we'll get a large super cat premium today, it's invested. Now, if we have a claim tomorrow, then we disinvest, and in a substantial way. If you take something like GEICO, the cash flow is always going to be positive probably on that. We won't have another Hurricane Andrew because we've backed out of the homeowners business to quite an extent. So month by month, the money comes in at a GEICO, and the faster it grows, the more the money that comes in. We have so much capital that we can basically put that money into whatever makes the most sense for Berkshire. So we have none of either the mental or psychological constraints or regulatory constraints that many insurance companies operate under. Many of them think they sort of should have this portion and this portion and that and so on. Investments usually play second fiddle to the insurance business at most companies that are in the insurance business. We look at them as being of equal importance, and we run them as two distinct businesses. We do whatever makes most sense on the investment side, whatever makes the most sense on the insurance side. We never do anything on the investment side that will impinge on our business on the insurance side. But you really should look at each one of our businesses separately. GEICO has entirely different characteristics than the super cat business. They both call themselves insurance. They both develop float. But in economic terms and in terms of competitive strengths and that sort of thing, they're two very different businesses. And our smaller businesses are different businesses. Some of those may grow reasonably well. We'll keep working on it. Charlie?
Yeah, if you look at a corporate stock, it's obvious you can buy any maturity of government bond you want. So one opportunity cost of buying the stock is to compare it with the bond. Well, you may find that half the stocks in America you're so fearful about or know so little about or think so poorly of that you'd rather have the government bond. So on an opportunity cost basis, they're taken out of the filter. Now you start finding corporations where you like the stocks way better than government bonds. You've got to compare them one against the other, and when you find one that you regard as the best opportunity, that you can understand as the best opportunity, now you've got one to buy. It's a very simple idea, and it uses nothing but the most elementary ideas from economics or game theory. It's child's play as a mental process. Now, it's hard to make the business appraisals, but the mental process is a cinch.
If Charlie and I were told we had a choice of buying stock A, B, C, or D, and all 2,500 or 3,000 or whatever may be listed on the New York Stock Exchange, or buying a 10-year government bond and we had to hold the stock for 10 years or the bond for 10 years, probably in at least 80% of the cases we'd take the 10-year government. In many cases because we didn't understand the business well enough elsewhere, or secondly, we may understand it and still prefer the 10% government. But we would measure everything that way. And I don't know, did you come up with 80% or where, Charlie? Desert Island, 10 years? Get to fondle a stock certificate or fondle a government bond? Which one are you going to choose?
But anyway, I think life is a whole series of opportunity costs. You got to marry the best person who is convenient to find will have you. You know, investment is much the same sort of a process.
I knew we'd get in trouble after lunch. Zone 2.
Hello, Martin Wiegand, Bethesda, Maryland, stockholder. For myself, my family, and other small business owners, I want to thank you for the annual reports. They help a lot in helping us make business decisions and life decisions. My question is, many people come here. Many people come here to listen to you and to copy and understand your investment philosophy. But why don't more people, in your opinion, try to copy your investment vehicle, a corporation that pays no dividends?
Well, I don't really think if there were, I think there are other things that are probably better to copy about Berkshire, but they don't get copied either. It was always interesting to me how few people, everybody read Graham's, and they didn't really disagree with him. They just didn't like following him because it didn't promise enough in a sense. I mean, people really wanted something very quickly. In terms of not paying dividends, we don't pay dividends because we think we can turn every dollar we retain into more than $1 of market value. I mean, the only reason for us to keep your money is if it becomes worth more by us keeping it than it would be worth if we gave it to you. And if we can create more than $1 of market value for every dollar we keep, you're better off whether you want to take that dollar out by selling a little piece of your stock or whether you continue to leave it in. That's the test. If we come to the conclusion that we can't do that, and we could come to the conclusion sometime, then we should distribute it to you. The interesting thing is, we're in certain businesses, for example, See's Candy being one. We don't have a way to intelligently use all of the money that See's generates within the See's Candy Company. So if See's were a standalone company, it would pay very large dividends. Not because it, just had some dividend paying policy. It would be simply because we wouldn't have a way of using, in this case, $30 million a year intelligently in expanding that business. The Buffalo News is the same way. We don't have a way of using money within that specific business intelligently to use the money that it generates. We hope that in the overall Berkshire Hathaway scheme of things, that we can intelligently use the money that the companies in aggregate generate for us. And we think so far we have, and we think the prospects are reasonably good that we can continue to do that. But dividend policy should really be determined by that criteria, also bearing in mind the possibilities of repurchase of stock too, but they should be determined by whether $1 left in the business is worth more than to the shareholder than $1 paid out. Someplace like Coca-Cola, if Coca-Cola had paid no dividends and simply repurchased shares and developed the bottling system and done the things that they have, the shareholders probably would have been even better off. They've been sensationally well off as it is, but they probably would have been even better off than they have been with the dividend policy they have had. And that's true for Gillette and Disney and companies of that sort that have got these terrific opportunities to use capital within the business or to repurchase shares of a company that simply can't be replaced. If that usually is the best use of capital, it's probably better than dividends. And we have written some about that, Martin, but people usually keep doing what they've been doing. They're hard to change. Charlie?
Well, it's interesting that you take that simple standard. You should retain money if you can make it worth more than it is by retaining it. That is not the standard thing that's taught in the corporate finance departments of our major universities. Why do we have this simple idea and they have another one? Time after time we find that so. I've tried to understand why they think the way they do, and I have great difficulty with it. I've just concluded that they're wrong, and But that isn't enough. There has to be a reason why so many smart people are that wrong. And that's a story for another day. But there are things gravely wrong with American education that I hope that Berkshire Hathaway is slowly helping to fix.
Can you imagine if pick any one of you here, and let's say the two of us were in a business together, was earning $100,000 a year. How would we decide whether to leave the $100,000 each year? And it'd be exactly what we've talked about here. If we thought the $100,000 would translate into a present value of more than $100,000 by some action, we'd leave it in, and if it didn't, we'd take it out. And it doesn't seem to register generally. And incidentally, in our own case, we'll probably go too long before we come to the conclusion that we're not really using it that effectively, because there'll be a certain denial we'll go through, and we'll say, well, that was just temporary last year. But that is our approach, and we'll do our best to apply it. Zone 3.
Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, my name is John Shane. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. You touched on the subject of return on equity in response to a different question. I wonder whether you might be willing to elaborate along the following line. Right now, the Standard & Poor's 500 in aggregate have a return on equity of about 22%. The average over the decades for corporate America has been more like 12 or 13%. How did we get to this point of extraordinary profitability, and how likely do you think we are over the next 10 or 15 years to revert back to the mean of the low teens?
Well, I would say is I never thought it would happen. So I start out with the fact that if you'd listened to me, you'd have been dead wrong if in terms of what the return on equity in 1996 or 1995, 1997 would be. It does not seem to me that 22% returns on equity are sustainable in a world where the long-term interest rate is 7%, and where the capability of saving large amounts in the economy are quite dramatic. You would just think that there would be some sort of leveling effect between 7 and the 22 you name, that as savings got directed within the economy and as the competitive forces operate that we've been taught will operate over time, would come into play. But I've been wrong on that subject, and that's why I say these levels are not unjustified if those kinds of returns can be made. Because let's just say that you had a 22% perpetual bond, and you had the ability, and let's say that a third of that coupon would be paid out. So you got a bond with a 22% coupon, and say 7% is paid out, being the dividend payout on the S&P, we'll say, and the other 15% is reinvested in more 22% bonds with similar characteristics. Now, what's that instrument worth on a present value basis in a 7% world? It's worth a lot of money. In fact, it's worth so much money that it becomes a mathematical fallacy at some point, because when the compound rate becomes higher than the discount rate, you get into infinite numbers, or you get into infinity, and that's a number. That's the concept we like to think about around Berkshire. We haven't figured out how to attain it. There's a book called The Petersburg Paradox, or there's an article called The Petersburg Paradox and the Growth Stock Fallacy. I think that's the name of it by a fellow named, I think, David Duran, written about 25 years ago. And it gets into this bit where the growth rate is higher than the discount rate. And it shouldn't work for an extended period of time, but it's sure fun while it's going on. Charlie?
Yeah, I think a couple of things contributed to this phenomenon that we so carefully mispredicted. Number one, it became very fashionable for corporations to buy in shares, and I think that we helped in a very small way bring on that enlightenment, and I think that was a plus in terms of rational corporate decision making. The other thing that happened is that the antitrust administration got way more lenient in allowing people to buy competitors. And I think those two factors helped raise returns on capital in the United States. And but that can't. You wouldn't think that could go on forever. And what 15% per annum compounded will do is grow way faster than the economy can grow, way faster than aggregate profits can grow over a long pull. So sooner or later something has to happen. I don't think we've reached a new order of things where the laws of mathematics are somehow repealed.
If real output in this country grows at, say, 3% a year, call it real GDP grows at 3% a year, and the capitalized value of industry in the country grows at 10% a year, at some point you get into mathematical absurdities. I mean, at the low inflation rates. You can't have if we have an economy that's 7 or 8 trillion now in GDP and 7 or 8 trillion in equity valuation, that may or may not make sense. But if you have one that's 15 billion in GDP and 75 billion in equity valuation, 75 trillion in equity valuation, you get to things that can't make any sense. So if you get these differential rates of growth among items that have some relationship, however tenuous or at least non-specific in the short run, it doesn't work after a while. And nobody wants to think about that. They don't want to think about their own death. But I mean, it doesn't go away just because you don't want to think about it. And we haven't gotten any point like that. But you can project out numbers, and they just won't make any sense after a while.
Yeah, corporate profits can't be 200% of GNP.
Yeah.
Indeed, they can't be 50% of GNP. So these high rates of compounding just go automatically into absurdity.
Yeah, they really can't be 20% of GDP or some number like that. So if you start saying you can't have a multiple of more, you get differential rates, and they just simply you leave the tracks after a while.
And all you people should be aware of this, because all the people who are professional sellers of investment advice and brokerage service, et cetera, have an immense vested interest in believing that things that can't be true are true.
Yeah,
and not only that, they've been selected in a Darwinian process to have formidable sales skills and large energy. And this is dangerous to the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, you've been selected to be the recipients of their advice.
Right. Furthermore, they figure out who we are and come in about 6 o'clock in the evening.
Zone 1 again.
Mike Assail from New York City. Could you explain a little more about what you've called the mind of the consumer and the nature of the product, and explain how you actually apply these concepts to find the companies with the growing demand and the best investment potential? And thank you for being two of the greatest professors I've ever had.
Thanks. What you really, when you get into consumer products, you're really interested in finding out or thinking about what is in the mind of how many people throughout the world about a product now and what it's likely to be in their mind 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. Now, virtually every person in the globe, let's get it down to 75% of the people in the globe, have some notion in their mind about Coca-Cola. They have, the word Coca-Cola means something to them. RC Cola doesn't mean anything to virtually anyone in the world, but does with the guy who owns RC, but and the bottler, but everybody has something in their mind about Coca-Cola, and overwhelmingly it's favorable. It's associated with pleasant experiences. Now, part of that is by design. I mean, it is where you are happy. It is at Disneyland, at Disney World, and it's at ballparks, and it's every place that you're likely to have a smile on your face, including the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, I might add. And that position in the mind is pretty firmly established, and it's established in close to 200 countries around the world with people. A year from now, it will be established in more minds, and it will have a slightly different overall position. And 10 years from now, the position can move just a little bit more. It's share of mind. It's not share of market. It's share of mind that counts. Disney, same way. Disney means something to billions of people. And if you're a parent with a couple of young children and you got 50 videos in front of you that you can buy, you're not going to sit down and preview an hour and a half of each video before deciding what one to stick in front of your kids. You have got something in your mind about Disney, and you don't have it about the ABC video company, or you don't even have it about you don't have it about 20th Century, or you don't have it about Paramount. So that name, to billions of people, including lots of people outside this country, it has a meaning. And that meaning overwhelmingly is favorable. It's reinforced by the other activities of the company. And just think of what somebody would pay if they could actually buy that share of mind, of billions of people around the world. You can't do it. You can't do it by $1 billion advertising budget or a $3 billion advertising budget or hiring 20,000 super salesmen. So you've got that. Now, the question is, what does that stand for 5 or 10 or 20 years from now? There'll be more people. There'll be more people that have heard of Disney. And that there will always be parents that are interested in having something for their kids to do. And that kids will love the same sort of things. And, that whoops. He emphasizes the key points when we get to those. But that is what you're trying to think about with the consumption product. That's what Charlie and I were thinking about when we bought See's Candy. I mean, here we were in 1972. We think we know a fair amount about candy. I know more than when I sat down this morning. I mean, I had about 20 pieces already. But, does their face light up on Valentine's Day, when you hand them a box of candy and say, it's some nondescript thing, and say, here, honey, I took the low bid, or something of the sort. And no, I mean, you want something, you've got tens of millions of people, or at least many millions of people that remember that the first time they handed that box of candy, it wasn't that much thereafter that they got kissed for the first time or something. So it's the memories are good, the association's good. Total process isn't just the candy. It's the person who takes care of you at Christmas time when they've been on their feet for 8 hours and people have been yelling at them because they've been in line with 50 people in line, and that person still smiles at them. The delivery process, it's the shop in which they get all kinds of things. The treat we give them, it's all part of the marketing personality. But that position in the mind is what counts with a consumer product. And that means you have a good product, very good product. It means you may need tons of infrastructure because you got to have that. I had a case of cherry coke awaiting me at the top of the Great Wall when I got there in China. Now that you've got to have something there so that the product is there when people want it. And that happened in World War II. General Eisenhower, said to Mr. Woodruff that he wanted a Coca-Cola within arm's length of every American serviceman in the world, and they build a lot of bottling plants to take care of that. That sort of positioning can be incredible. It seems to work especially well for American products. I mean, people want certain types of American products worldwide. Our music, our movies, our soft drinks, our fast food. You can't imagine, at least I can't, a French firm or a German firm or a Japanese firm having that selling 47 or 48% of the world's soft drinks. I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. It's part of something you could broadly call an American culture, and the world hungers for it. And Kodak, for example, probably does not have quite the same. George Fisher's doing a great job with the company. This goes back before that. But Kodak probably does not have the same place in people's mind worldwide quite as it had 20 years ago. I mean, people didn't think of Fuji in those days, we'll say, as being in quite the same place. And then Fuji took the Olympics, as I remember, in Los Angeles, and they pushed their way to more of a parity with the Kodak. And you don't want to ever let them do that. And that's why you can see a Coca-Cola or a Disney or companies like that doing things that you think, well, this doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. If you didn't spend this $10 million, wouldn't they still sell as much Coca-Cola? But You know, that I quoted from that 1896 report of Coca-Cola and the promotion they were doing back then to spread the word. You never know which dollar is doing it, but you do know that everybody in the world that's virtually has heard of your product. Overwhelmingly, they've got a favorable impression on them, and the next generation is going to get it. So that's what you're doing with consumer products. With See's Candy, you know, we are no better. We want to no better than the last person who's been served their candy with the last product they've been served. But as long as we do the job on that, people can't catch us. You know, we can charge a little more for it because people are not interested in taking the low bid, and they're not interested in saving a penny a bottle on colas. Remember, we've talked about in these meetings private labels in the past, and private label has stalled out in the soft drink business. That they want the real thing, and 900 and some odd million 8-ounce servings will be served today of Coca-Cola product around the world. 900 million, you know, and it'll go up next year, the year after. And I don't know how you displace companies like that. I mean, if you gave me $100 billion, and I encourage any of you who are thinking about that to step forward, but if you gave, and you told me to displace the Coca-Cola company as the leader in the world in soft drinks, you know, I wouldn't have the faintest idea how to do it. Those are the kind of businesses we like. Charlie?
Yeah. I think the See's Candy example has an interesting teaching lesson for all of us. Warren said it's the first time we really stepped up for brand quality, and it was a very hard jump for us who had been used to buying dollar bills for 50 cents. And the interesting thing was that if they had demanded an extra $100,000 for the See's Candy Company, we wouldn't have bought it. And that was after Warren had been trained under the greatest professor of his era and had worked 90 hours a week.
And eating a lot of chocolates, too.
Absorbing everything in the world. I mean, we just didn't have minds well enough trained to make an easy decision right. And by accident, they didn't ask the extra $100,000 for it, and we did buy it, and as it succeeded, we kept learning. I think that shows that the name of the game is continuing to learn, and even if you're very well trained and have some natural aptitude, you still need to keep learning, and that brings along the delicate problem. People sometimes talk about two aging executives. I don't know what the hell that means as an adjective, because I don't know anybody that is going in the other direction. But you people who hold shares are betting for a while at least until younger successors come along. You're betting to some extent on what we'll now tactfully continue to call aging executives continuing to learn.
You know, if we hadn't have bought See's with some subsequent developments after that, because that made us aware of other things, we wouldn't have bought Coca-Cola in 1988. I mean, you can give See's a significant part of the credit for the, I guess, $11 billion plus profit we've got in Coca-Cola at the present time. Now you say, well, how could you be so dumb as not to be able to recognize a Coca-Cola? Well, I don't know, but
you're only drinking about 20 cans.
Yeah,
a day,
right. It wasn't I hadn't been exposed to it, and it's amazing. But it just made us start thinking more. We saw how decisions we made in relation to See's played out in a marketplace and that sort of thing, and we saw what worked and didn't work, and it made us appreciate a lot what did work and shy away from things that didn't work. But it definitely led to a Coca-Cola, and we've had the good luck to buy some businesses themselves in their entirety that taught us a lot. You know, we bought, and it's worked in the other direction. I mean, we were in the windmill business one time. Charlie stayed out of the windmill business, but I was in the windmill business and pumps, and third-level department or second-level department stores, and I just found out how tough it was and how you could apply all kinds of energy to them, and it didn't do any good. It made a great deal of sense to figure out what pond to jump in, and what pond you jumped in was probably more important than how well you could swim. Charlie?
I don't think it's necessary that people be as ignorant as we were, as long as we were. I think American education could be better, but not in the hands of many of the people who are now teaching it.
Is there any group we've forgotten to offend? I mean, okay, zone 2.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman. My name is Hudson Zhu, and originally from China, and I'm living in Kansas. And it's my honor to speak to you both. My question is, if someone like to form a company doing what you did 30 or 40 years ago, what is your suggestion to them? And would you share some of your wisdom with us? Thank you.
First thing we'd suggest they send us a royalty, but Charlie, you take over on that. You've thought more about starting over again than I have.
I want to frankly say that that's a question I ordinarily duck. I always believe in getting the fundamental mental tools in place. And I always believe in running reality as it comes in, preferably vicariously through the newspaper, etc., instead of through personal painful experience, through the filter of these sound ideas. And I not only think that works in life to create success, I think it makes life more fun. So I argue for sound thinking, but the exact specific techniques of turning yourself into another Warren Buffett, I leave to you.
Well, the one thing I would advise is I think there's a ton of opportunity out there, and I would do something I enjoyed. I wouldn't do something because I thought it was going to get me to a life I was going to enjoy later on, or because if I made a lot of money I was going to be a lot happier or anything like that. I've never done that, and I think that you will do well in what you enjoy, and I think it's crazy in life to endure a whole lot that I don't mean. Charlie and I worked in a grocery store. We didn't really jump up and down over it all the time, but in terms of it, making a commitment to really be in a business that you're only in it for the money, I think that's crazy. If we were in this only for the money, you know, we'd have quit a long time ago, obviously. And it just you ought to have fun while you're doing it. It should not be jammed tomorrow and not jammed today. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think you'll get better results that way too. Zone 2? Or did we just do zone 2? I think we did. Yeah. Maybe zone 3.
Dave Uberg from Sac City, Iowa. And I haven't heard you on the moral and ethical considerations of stocks like ABC and Disney. They are now getting more and more criticism from mainstream religious groups in this country. Their reliance on sex and violence and their cronyism, homosexuality, and did they hear it?
I didn't. We didn't cut anybody off there.
Yeah, right.
What? But I would say that, you know, I'm delighted to have my grandchildren exposed to the full range of Disney product. I'd love to take them to Disneyland or Disney World or take them to Disney movies or Disney videos. So, I think that the Disney company is being run in an absolutely first-rate way, and I have no problem whatsoever with gays being employed or receiving benefits or anything of the sort. Zone 1.
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett. Good afternoon, Mr. Munger. My name is Basuni Rima from Arlington, Texas. I see in the USA Today article about the shortage of labor in the state, and I was wondering, when you analyze a company, do you take that into consideration by choosing companies who's not dependent so much on labor? The second question is, I heard you in the beginning of the meeting that is so much capital coming from foreign country. You mentioned so many different countries who bought the Berkshire Hathaway, and I'm sure they buy all companies in the Dow. Do you feel like the analysts who analyze the Dow had that into consideration, that the Dow now is becoming as the Walmart of the security business in the world, where all the national of different country, they bypass their market and they come in and buy in the United States, and as a result, that the idea of Mr. Greenspan as far as exuberant, it's mute, because if you remember how the Japanese, when they start to buy the real estate in America, they force us to pay high premium for the price, and I think that's what's going to happen in the market. And we as Americans who being accustomed to low PEs, now we're going to miss on, and the price is going to continue going up